This is Love Riot Create, and I am Kallie Ross, and I am here with Gaby Robbins, right there. She's right there.
Hello.
And then I'm also here with Morgan Wylie,
Woohoo!
and we're talking about character names on Love Riot Create. I love creating new character names. I love writing characters that actually kind of emulate their names. Is that a good way to put it? They go hand in hand, and we're going to talk about tonight not only maybe what the trends are and what people are doing, but what our favorite character names are of all time. I say that loosely because I know that it was hard to come up with them, and some of mine are from classic novels, and I'm not going to bring those up. But I might bring one up because it's really good. But then we're also going to talk about one thing Morgan thought of is really cool names for places that we love. Because let's be honest, when you're thinking about some of your favorite novels, whether it's Chronicles of Narnia, whether it's Anne of Green Gables, I was talking about that on Facebook with some friends, whether it is Lord of the Rings, whether it is Cassie Clare's Infernal Devices. There are these really cool places that I think some of our favorite authors have come up with that we like to really reference the creativity in the names of the places as much as the names of the people. So without further ado, I think we should bring up our favorite let's go female character names if you've had any, and what they were and what books they were from. Morgan, you want to go first?
Let's see. Okay, I had a really hard time remembering some names. I like the name of the female character from Patricia Briggs' series, and her name is Mercedes. And I don't always love that name, but I like this name for this girl. I think it is perfect and fitting for who she is. But I do like it too, probably because when I was younger, it's what I wanted my name to be. But so there's one.
Awesome. Okay, Gabby, what's one of yours? Or more, if you have more.
You know what was funny was that I was thinking of all kinds of guy names that I loved, and when you said that, I was like, oh crap, I don't think I have a girl name, but I do, and it's kind of a cop-out, but it's the truth. I've always loved Hermione. I just thought it's so not a classic name, and you think about Harry and Ron, that's pretty like those are pretty standard and slightly English, but Hermione is just like, I mean, never heard anything like it before. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite girl names because it's different, but it fit her so perfectly. I have, there's stories where sometimes there'll be a name and I'll be like, yeah, I still don't, by the end of the book, I'm still not buying it, because it doesn't feel natural in the story or fit the character, but for her, it was perfect. Like, it's one of my favorites.
That's a good one. I can reference Harry Potter almost for everything, though, when it comes to names. But I think I'll go with my first one. It is a little off, and I went this route of character names that I think are so outlandish, and it's because they're from these fantasy worlds that I love, that's why I think I like them so much. And the first one is Yelena, and it's Elena, but with a Y in front of it, and it's from a book called Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder, and she is someone that is like a food taster, and she tastes for poison, and it's such like it's a raw world. It's almost medieval, but there are other fantastical things in it, and I think her name is just amazing, and I think it's one of those that it fits the character, and I think that's why I like it so much. And also, it's not Mary or Sarah, which I think are great names, but it fits the world. And I think that that's part of the creativity of writing some of these fantasy novels, is having a character name that fits the world. Do you guys have any more?
Yeah, I got one more. I remember.
Okay.
I like the name Ashlyn.
Is it from a book?
It is actually. I think I've seen it in a couple books, but the one I'm thinking of, it's in Melissa Marr's the fairy books.
Yeah. Wicked Lovely and all those.
Yeah. Wicked Lovely, yes, Ashlyn, which is a fairy-ish name. It's a Celtic derivative.
Well, Gabby, do you have another one?
I don't. I really sucky with girl names. And I think too. I mean, I love classic names like, and I'll talk about my lead character. I love long, beautiful names.
Okay, Gabriella.
Right. I hated my name growing up though, but I just feel like it gives not stature, but it's like heavy, you know what I mean? Like I like heavy names that are kind of like, well, what is she like? You know, what is she like? Like I like names like that. So, you know, I'm a big fan of those long, you know, classic names, but none of them come off the top of my head. I can't think of any girl names that I love.
Well, another one I really like is from Graceling, and it's the main character Katza. I think that that's like a cool name for that fantasy world. And then I also wrote from the selection the main female character America.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why that stuck with me, but I just thought it was so symbolic, I guess, and that's
And
why
I feel like that's another name where you're like, when you start reading it, you're like, what? And then you're like, it really hit her. It was a cool name. Like I was really impressed by it at the end of it. You're like, and two, the nicknames, he called her Mare all the time.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. I just thought it was sweet. Like that name at first I was like, oh, this is going to be awful. There's no way I can read through this whole book and he called her America the whole time. But I loved it towards the end, so I thought that was a good one. Katniss isn't a bad name because it's as much as that's not one of my favorite series, at first it was the same thing, but I feel like it fit her, you know, and had such a cool ring to it. It's so different, kind of like Hermione. So that's another one that's a favorite.
Mm-hmm. What about guy names?
Yes.
Morgan, what about you? What guy names stick out to you?
I like, and I've seen this in a couple different books, but Cash. And let me think about another one, but that's one that jumps out at me.
Gabby, do you have another one or not another one, but a guy name that you want to share?
Yes, I always think there's a character that's in the Iron Fae series. His name is Ash.
Yes, I love that one too.
And I think a lot of it is because it's Ash. Like the Iron Knight book, I have that book and he's staring at me right now. It is my favorite, like, dude character that was, like, ultimately, like, the greatest man guy. Like, he was so honorable. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
but I also love Puck, which is like a take on a classic name.
That's a classic, yeah.
In the book.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, she incorporated the new trendy cool name with a classic, you know, character, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, you're right.
But I agree with you. Ash should win.
Ash is one of my favorites. Yes, I have a couple. In the Under the Never Sky series, there was a character, a guy named Peregrine, but they called him Perry. And Peregrine is a bird, but I was like, another time, like I was like, no, why are you naming guys such weird names? And one of my favorites. And I think, too, when you like the character, it's a little easier for you to be like, that's a crazy name, but I love it. But they called him Perry, and I loved it. I thought it was such a cool name because he was such a different, distinct character. You know, he wasn't a typical, and this is a dystopian, but it has a real, like, almost Native American feel to it. He was from a tribe and stuff, so it fit perfectly because it was an animal and all of that. And then the other one that I thought was interesting that I didn't think I was gonna like, but do you remember Patch? And he was from one of the Angel series, but I can't remember the name of the series.
It was the Hush Hush one, wasn't it?
Hush Hush, yes. Yeah. I loved Patch because I thought the way that they described him, he was such a, like, guy's guy. Like he always wore a baseball cap and like and he was kind of rough around the edges, but his name was Patch, and like it just didn't vibe with me. Like I was like, but at the end of it, I thought it was such a cool name. I really enjoyed that one.
And I think that name is short for Patrick, if I'm right.
Was it?
I'm not sure. Like I don't know about those novels, but I think in general, that's like one of the ones I picked because, well, the first one I picked was Poe in Graceling, which is the love interest of Katza, and I thought I loved him, and I thought it was interesting that he had this just plain name, Poe. Like it just.
Yeah, I had a hard time with his name.
Yeah, but I thought it was neat because it was not a normal like this world name.
Right.
Right.
But the other one that I love is Jem from the Infernal Devices series.
Yes.
It's literally short for James, and I think it's such a neat take on the name James and being called Jem. I don't know why I love it so much, but I just love that one.
It's good.
You're like, I don't know about that one.
No, I love Jem. I love that name because I felt that way too. I was like Jem, but it fit his personality. He was so distinct and just such. He was so. There was something so perfect about the way she described him and just who he was and his sweetness. He's an absolute favorite character. Yeah, different name. Really enjoyed that.
But his name was a classic name. But
yeah,
he had an interesting nickname, and I think that that's something that I love to think about when I think of my own characters when I'm picking names for them. And so with that, I'd love to transition into our own character names. I know that maybe sometimes we may not want to share everything about their name, but let's be honest. If I know your character's name, I can go and Google what the name means, right?
True. Yeah.
But share as much as you want, and you don't have to share like the whole cast or anything like that. But if there is an interesting story about how you picked any of your character names, I would love to hear that. Do one of you want to go first, or do you want me to go first on one of these?
I can go first.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I love picking names too. Most of my names I get either from, well, like the baby name book or website. I look at a lot of names on there because then they give you the meaning, so that makes it easy. Or I'll have a feeling of a name that I like, and then I try to find a name that kind of matches that. But I do also pay a lot of attention to the meanings, and especially in the Landria series, all of my characters have meanings. Now, it might not be an outright meaning, because some of them I kind of made up, but they have roots of, most of mine are either Old English or Gaelic, or they find their roots there. So I'll take a part of the name and then use that meaning and add it on. So, let's see. Well, like Dagon, I love his name, but his name simply enough means black-haired. So it works. Ella, she's one of my kind of side characters. Her name means beautiful fairy, and she is a fairy, so I figured that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
You are not being very forthcoming with the secrets or the storytelling here on how these come into being something significant later. You can't give us one clue about one of them?
Well, okay, let's see. Hallister's name, or part of his name, means ruler of his household.
Cool.
I like it. So you choose the names based on the meanings, and you try to match up your character.
Not necessarily. I kind of get a name, and then I look to see if I like the meaning of it. I did have a couple names that I liked, and I just kept, but I didn't like the meaning of it. It didn't really mean anything that for me. Some of them I do a little bit of both. I find a part of a name that I like the meaning of, and then I try to transition the name to hopefully sound a little bit different. It's one thing I like, especially with writing fiction, but especially with fantasy, is you can kind of get away with a lot of strange names or changing them up. I also like to take normal names and twist them or spell them differently or give them a different pronunciation. Like Kallie, for example, I mean, it sounds pretty simple, but it's spelled odd, but her full name is Kalliana, so that kind of adds a you know, fantasy-ish flavor to her name.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else. I don't know what else.
No, that's good. I think of, like, for instance, in Descent, the main character's name is Ollie, but her real name's Olivia. And Olivia means peace. So she is a peacemaker, essentially. That was the point. And when I picked the name Olivia, I didn't want her to be a girly girl because there's another character, Alexis, that is a very girly girl. And I wanted my heroine to kind of just be a little bit more... it sounds bad to say normal, but I don't mean normal. And honestly, it's kind of like me, like a little bit more like level-headed, not quite as like everything's got to be pink. And so, I thought with a name like Olivia, a cool nickname would be Ollie. So, she's a sporty girl and not necessarily a blingy girl. Mm-hmm. And then you have Alexis, who is a blingy girl, but her name means helper. And so when I was looking up names and found that name and I knew that it meant helper, I thought that was really cool for her to be kind of like the sidekick. So so that kind of helped me when I was picking names. But I also needed a name that was kind of girly, and Alexis is definitely one of those that's very girly. You, Gabby?
My names, because my book is kind of based off of, you know, muses, I wanted my names to all be kind of Greek names, but because a lot of the muses that I had to name were hiding in, like, the real world, they had to sound as if they were Greek, like their parents would have named them, but they could be, you know, in the real world, like they didn't have a distinct sound of being a Greek, you know, muse or anything like that. Evangeline, my main character, her name starts with an E, and E was kind of the name, the letter. For some reason, Enigma was a big, like, starting point for me, so I always imagined calling her E, and I don't know why. That's just kind of the way. And Evangeline was just a name that I loved for some reason, and that's what it was, and it's always been that way. I don't even really know what her name means, so that would be a good thing to look up. And then for some reason, I started looking up Greek names, and Neo jumped out. He's one of the other main characters, and it was just perfect for who I saw in my head. So some of my characters have their names have meanings. Others were just, it fit who I saw in my head, like it fit the character. So they're all, a majority of them are based in Greek, like Greek names. The rest of them are not. Calliope is one of my main characters, but she was the original muse, so that was her name, and so that's why she has that. There is one character who I imagine in my head to look Latin or Spanish descent, and when we named my daughter Maya, we named her Maya Isabella because in my brain I thought I wanted to call her Isa. I just thought it would be the cutest name ever, and then we never called her that, like, ever. So when I was thinking of names, I was like, what would be a cool name for a Latin American girl, like a nickname? And I found Isadora is a Greek name, and so I thought it would be cool to name her that and have them call her Isa because that's a very common, like, nickname for Isabella or in, like, the Latin American community. So that's how that name came around. I also have a Maya because my daughter requested that after she helped me with the storyline. But I spell it, Maya is obviously, the way we spell it is like Mayan Indian. But in the book, she'll be spelled the Greek way. So it's M-A-I-A instead of M-A-Y-A. So, yeah, and then obviously Lorelai is one of my baddie characters, and her name is Temptress, but she's got a lot of background in the Muse mythology. So that's why her name is that way. And then I just found cool names that I just thought were so cool. Like that were Greek, that they could go either way in today's world, but that were just neat. So a lot of my names are based in Greek mythology, are Greek names. And then I have a couple names that I threw in there because of where they're from, where they're hiding. So a lot of mine are just sound good or are Greek. And then,
well, no, but you bring up a really good point, because I was going to ask this question next. You're talking about how you look up names specifically that are in Greek origin, and then of course Morgan mentioned hers being more of that Gaelic or Irish origin, or Scottish even, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And so, and of course in mine, they all have, I do have the 2 Hispanic kids that are in it, and even their names being Hispanic have some sort of religious meaning, because in mine, all of the names of the characters that are from this tribe underground, their names all have a Hebrew or Israeli origin. And so I think you bring up a good point that you kind of do have to stick to the roots of your story, and that your language has to be fluid when it comes to names of places and people, because I'm working on a new fantasy novel, and even when I thought I could make up anything, I had a critique partner read it and say, that doesn't flow because you've got these names of people and it doesn't match this name of a city. Like, it just doesn't coincide with each other. They don't have the same roots. They don't have the same origins, and it feels too hodgepodge. And I think that that as an author, as a writer, you have to really consider that it has to be fluid. You have to have, unless you have someone from, the real world going into that, fairy world or that Greek world, then you can have someone named Bob, hanging out with them. But if they belong there, they have to have a similar origin in name. So I've heard maybe 1 or 2 guy names in this, and girl names from everybody. I don't think I did a guy name, but Mateo means devoted, and Gabriel means hero, if that gives you any hint as to kind of where mine lie. But then, which name are you more invested in when you come into this? Like, Gabby, you talked about seeing the character and then naming them according to how you see them. Morgan, you're looking, kind of at origins and kind of even mixing them up like a name and making it fit. But which characters are the most important for you to name first, and why? What about you, Morgan?
Well, I would think my initial answer would be, well, the main characters are the most important to name because they're the ones who are most often named. I'm trying to remember. Well, like with Kallie, she's my main female. She actually had a different name when she started because I liked the meaning of the name and it fit. But as I was writing her, I was having a really hard time grasping her and realized that her name was wrong. So she got renamed halfway through, which was a challenge all of its own. But as soon as I did that, it clicked. And then I was like, okay, I get her more. So I think definitely main characters are important. Who you're focusing your emphasis on is probably the priority for naming, but sometimes side characters are easier because they either have a shorter part or a simpler part, or they're just talking at you the most loud. Some of mine are just like, talk about me, I'm here, here's my name. And they're easier to write, so sometimes they end up getting more of an emphasis. So I'm not sure I'm even answering your question right.
You're doing good, because I think that you do bring up a good point about some of those sub-characters. Sometimes I think that we put pressure on ourselves as writers to have these amazing main characters with fantastic names like Cash and Mercedes, and then you're talking about car sales. Like, it's one of those things where I think that, like, we want to stay trendy and we want to stay cool, but I think that you bring up a really good point. you may find a name that you think is a beautiful name, but halfway through the novel think to yourself, this does not fit who this character is becoming and who I'm writing, so I have to change it. And that's a tough thing to do. I've had to do it. I actually, not too long ago, changed the names of cities in a world that I'm writing, and it was tough. I mean, it was like one of those things where I was like, golly, like, I thought writing a chapter was hard, but figuring out what these names are going to be is even harder. But Gabby, what about you? What characters have you found are the hardest to figure out names for?
I think it was a little more challenging to figure out names of Muse who were still kind of in Musai, which is where the realm that the Muse are, because I wanted them to sound a little bit more godlike, you know, instead, but they couldn't be the classic names of the Muse. So, but I didn't want them to sound so out there that they wouldn't be relatable. So I went through and just looked at a bunch of Greek names and things like that, and that took me a long time just because I wanted them to have stature, but at the same time I wanted it to not be like Zeus, you know, like something that was just ridiculous. So obviously I wouldn't use Zeus, but I'm saying something that big, you know, like it took me a long time. So there were 5 characters, and 3 of them were women, and so it was names like Zoe and Helena and Pelagia and Andreas. They had more, you know, gumption to them, but they were still classic Greek names. So yeah, those were the harder ones to name. I feel like naming things have not been difficult for me besides that, of really kind of putting some thought and trying to, because I feel like once I get a character, then it's like, when I name them, it's done. I will say that I have gone back and forth with Evangeline because I love that name, and it's perfect, and all of that. And Morgan sent me the name, what her name means, and I should probably say what it means now that I brought it up. Good news, or bearer of good news, which will work great with my story. But I started writing, and then somebody asked me a question about one of my favorite books, and so I pull out Finnegan of the Rock, which, I mean, I pretty much carry that book around with me, and the main character's name is Evangeline, and I was like, how did I miss that? How did I not remember that? Now, it's not like Harry Potter. Not everybody has read that book, and that's a pretty common name, but still, it threw me. Like, for a minute, it kind of messed me up, because I was like, did I just put that name there because I read that book like 4 times? So that name, like, I almost feel like if I find another E name that just rocks my world, I feel like it fits her. I feel like that might change, but for now, I mean, I still love the name, but I think it's always in my head, like, why did I choose it? We'll have to see how that plays out, but for now, that's her name.
I mean, it'd be different if you started to call her Dumbledore. I mean, like, right. Then I'd have to tell you, no, like, you totally stole that.
No. But it's one of my favorite books, so it was kind of like, how did I miss that? Like, how did I miss that her name? Well, she doesn't say her name till, like, the second third of the book, because she's kind of mute at the beginning of the book. But still, I was like, how did I miss that her name was Evangeline, But is it Evangelina? I don't remember. It's really close. So I was like, oh, man. So it's always in the back of my head when I'm writing. I'm kind of like at the point where I'm like, give me something else. What's your name supposed to be if it's not supposed to be this? It's almost like it's so important that I want to make sure that my mind is open to what it's supposed to be. But I know it's going to be E. I know it has to start with E. That's probably the only thing I know for sure about it. So, yeah. But yeah, I love naming my characters. I've got some really fun ones, and I like it. So now if I could just write what they want to say and finish that, it'd be great.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I just realized that I never gave my classic name of the character that I like so much.
Edward. It's Edward. I know it.
No. Are you ready? Count Monte Cristo.
That's a sandwich.
It is a sandwich, and it is also Alexander Dumas's novel. And I don't know why. It's the title of the book. When you have a great name that can also be a title of a book, I think that you've got Oliver Twist. Like, that's another one. Like, you just can't go wrong.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over names, and we've also kind of gone over the fact that there has to be some sort of origin that coincides with your story for the names. I don't know that we've really outright said it, but you can get all this information on baby name websites. Just type in a Google search for baby name meanings, and there's like a gazillion of them. I even came across one that had the origins of the names, I mean, literally spelled out. And what's neat is you could, like a name like James has several different origins, so you can specifically look at the origin that you're wanting it to maybe be from to see if the meaning is a little bit different than it is in another origin. I just remember James being that way because it was like Scandinavian, Scottish, it had like British, I mean, like it had a ton of different origins. When it came to the meanings were all very similar, but still. So are places' names as important as people's names? Morgan.
Yes and no. I think sometimes not necessarily, because if they're not significant to the story other than just to kind of give you a place and a time and where they are, then, you know, because obviously the characters are the main people, the names. However, there are also very significant things that happen in places that, you know, you need to remember either throughout a series or, but you can also use names or places as a character themselves. In my series, Elandria is the realm, but it is also a living entity, so it is a character in and of itself. So I think and you know, then there's names of different territories and places, and I think they are important too because they give either what am I trying to say, like heritage to where some of the characters are from. They give, and I think that, you know, where you're from is part of your identity. It, you know, it relates to you. So I think it's very important. Whether it's more important, I don't know, but it's important.
Yeah. Gabby, what about you? I mean, I know that you're writing from a different realm a little bit, but most of your novel takes place on Earth.
Right.
So does that, I mean, like when it comes to even a place that is already named for you, how important is it for you to make it known that that is the place that your characters are at? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that for me, the hardest part was trying, because there isn't really a realm that these muses live in, grounding it in something that is a part of the history of the muse was important to me. But then naming it, obviously I named it Musai because that was the mountain that they found the muses on and stuff like that in Greek mythology. And that I wanted to call it Muse. I wanted to call it Muse because I thought that would be so cool. But I feel like it's so important to ground it in something that, you know, there's so much Greek mythology that I needed to make it feel more real. And when I would think about it, I would think about like Hogsmeade and Hogwarts and Privet Drive, all these names that it almost like you just knew that there was a history there. I had to really kind of step back and be like, as much as Muse just kind of rolls off my tongue, it sounds cool to me, I can't do it. When it comes to places on Earth, the hard part for me is to not make it sound hokey. So there's times where I'll read a book and they'll talk about real places and it sounds natural in the story, and there's other times where you're just like, did they really just talk about that McDonald's on 42nd Street? Like, you know, and it just sounds weird, you know, and you're just like, it takes you out of the story. that's where I'm trying to find a balance. And I've really appreciated sometimes where storytellers have told about a place that you know about, but have renamed it. And it makes it feel a little more real because you're still in the story. You're in their story. But then you're connected because you're like, I know where that's at, you know? So I'm trying to find that balance right now of naming something, you know, a theater name, or just taking all of these cool landmarks and then kind of renaming them, but keeping all the history there. I think it's a fine balance. I think it depends. I kind of feel like my book's more of urban fantasy, so it's not quite like Alondria, where you can kind of just say this is what it's called. But at the same time, I want it to feel like you could walk there and it be a place that you could visit, and it not be hokey. So yeah, I think it's a balance.
Well, and just to give you just a tip on, I know that New York City is kind of one of those places where you can get lost in New York City reading a book about New York City, even though it's not about New York City. And I think Cassie Clare does a good job of that. Yeah. Not naming places per se, they're more of landmarks. And then also another one is Carolyn Schultz. If you ever read anything by her, she's grown up in New York City, and her first series, she has a second series that just came out, but her first series is a girl that lives in New York City. And I think she does a great job of naming landmarks and having events happen there. And because I've been to a few of them, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can totally picture that. You know, but at the same time, I don't feel like it's too fake. She doesn't go too deep where it's painted for me. I can actually imagine what I've seen. So even if it's that 15 years from now, maybe it's something that's changed a little bit. It's not that detailed that I'd tell the difference in time. But she just does a great job of weaving the place into the story as much as the people. And I think that's one thing that's key. I personally, some of the different places I think of when I think of cool names of places, I think of in that book Poison Study I was talking about earlier, the land is called Ixia, and it's a totally different name than anything I've ever heard before. But at the same time, you have someone like Cassie Clare writing about the city of bones, and it being this like underground city made of bones, and where monks live. And it's just, to me, I think that's just, it's so plain and simple, but it works. It just works so well. And it's hard because I am going from writing a book where it's just underground, there's not really a city name, to now writing a complete world and having to come up with names for every city, and not even having a name for the world yet, or does it even have a name? So for me, the place, while it's important for me to name it, I feel like that the places' names have been a lot harder than the character names.
Oh yeah.
Because I've already assumed what origin everything needs to come from, so now they have to kind of match up, and it's really hard. So, okay. I can't think of anything else. The only thing we haven't really touched on that I thought would be kind of a fun ending to our character name discussion is, what are your favorite villain names? Because I think that this is one that a lot of authors and writers have a whole lot more fun with. And can you think of any?
Maleficent.
Yeah, that's a great one. I thought of that one. Can you think of any?
Oh, this is sad.
Well, and listen, this is what's crazy. I feel like that in my books even. Go ahead.
Doctor Who. What's his name? Oh, why can't I think of it? Not Doctor Who. Sherlock.
I was like, the Daleks?
I know. What's my favorite guy's name? It's Sherlock. Moriarty.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that name. Love that.
Yeah,
name.
that's a good one. But the thing is like when I was looking up names of villains and villainesses, if that's a word, it's you can't find a bunch of meanings to those names. And I feel like that the book I'm reading or writing right now, I even have names of characters that are villains that their names are nasty. Like they mean creepy or mean things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you
Like
guys ever think about that with your villains?
Voldemort didn't mean anything. It was just Tom Riddle all mixed up, right?
But what about you with your characters, like with your villains? Is there anything that goes with their name or that has meaning with their name?
Well, like with Milena, her name means, well, the Mal part of her name means chief, so, and she's, you know, very controlling, and but I also, Mal is also a root, you know, that means ill, or I'm not sure if evil is right, but kind of a...
She makes you sick.
Yeah. I mean, that's not too significant, but...
No, but I like it. Like, right now, I have a character that is creepy as all get out, and his name is Reynard, which is a weird name, but his name means fox. And I picked it because I thought that this guy is cunning, and he's lean and lithe like a fox.
Yeah,
and,
that works.
I picture him having kind of a long face and a long nose like a fox. So, yeah, I mean, like... So for me, it's not that the name has a specific meaning involving his character, but that that there were just some similarities. It just seemed like a good name for a character that's kind of sneaky.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Lorelai obviously means temptress, and then Karina, who is the muse, that is bad. She is, they say, egocentric, and talking about, I mean, there's just like, she deep down, her primary concern is herself, and she has a lot of self-doubt, which pretty much describes her as a character. So, yeah, Karina definitely fits that. Yeah.
Okay. I know I said to end it off, but I actually have one more thing to end off the show tonight. I was just thinking about this because we name characters like mainly we're YA writers. So around that teenage year, they're growing into essentially their name because we've picked out what they're going to mean and what they're going to do and how they're going to act. To some degree, because a lot of times I'll be honest, they run away, and I'm like, where'd they go? Just change my story. But do you feel like, or first of all, do you know what your name means? And do you feel like that you've grown into what your name means the same way we expect our characters to?
I know Morgan is an old Welsh name. I think it means of the sea. So I'm not really sure about that one, but
that's awesome. Gabby, do you know what your name means?
My name means God's able-bodied one. Yeah. I don't know. I thought it also meant like messenger of God because of the angel Gabriel.
Yeah.
I don't know about being able-bodied, but I mean, I consider, all of us messengers of God. So yeah.
Well, Kallie means woman of the peninsula. So I don't know what that. Maybe I should be living it up in Florida somewhere. I wish I could live in Disney World.
Yeah. I should be by the ocean and
visit me.
For real.
But yeah, I just thought it was interesting because we expect our characters to have these names that have meaning and they translate into who the character becomes. But then are we really even that ourselves, or did our parents just pick our names because it was cool? I know that my mom picked my name because she thought it was a pretty name. Like, she didn't know what it meant. She didn't look it up before she named me. She just wrote it on the birth certificate, and she started it with a K because her name's Kay. You know, like, that's her thought process. And I think I named my own children so differently. Like, I made sure I knew what the meaning of their name was, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. My name came out of a hat.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there were a few other ones in there that they couldn't decide on, so they drew it, and that's what came out.
Well, if I were a boy, my name was going to be Michael, I believe.
My mom just kind of said, "Ooh, that's a pretty name," and then she said, "I just couldn't think of a middle name, so I literally have no middle name. Like, Gabriella was good enough, and she was done."
If you ever need a pseudonym, if you ever need a pen name, your last name can be blank. Like, wouldn't that be a good last name for a writer?
Like Gabriella Blank?
Sorry, I always think of cool pen names. It's kind of, not that I'll ever need one probably, but if someone ever needs one, I'm always good at them. What is it?
Okay. I looked up my name on the Baby Names World to see if it was any different, and they said it's uncertain, but perhaps Bright C. But then as you read down in the additional information, it says Welsh, more of the sea, great, bright white, or because it comes from Morcant, the masculine name, which is circle or completion.
You are Circle Girl, and that is so awesome. I love it. Well, do you guys have anything else to add about names of places, people, things? I mean, I could go on and on.
I did have one thought when you were talking about having your names flow with, like, there's the cities and kind of where they're from, and I was thinking about, now, my story is all fantasy in the other realms. So I have a territory, an elf territory, and a shifter territory, and I have a fairy territory. And I was just thinking about how within those, when I did my names, like, especially when I gave them last names, I really tried to keep them similar sounding. So all the fairies that are of importance who had last names all flow a certain way or end a certain way, and then those in the elves, theirs kind of end a different way. And then my shifters, I tried to give theirs has a totally different vibe all of its own. So it's kind of more a rougher, almost not Germany descent, but, you know, a little bit harsher sounding.
Well, and I think that's brilliant. You need that. I think it's something that you have to have if you want people to recognize who your character belongs with, or it. I mean, like, I love that when I'm reading, because then I know that automatically by the way their name sounds, where they live or who they hang out with, or what in your case, what race they are. I don't know if that's the right terminology though.
Yeah, I think so. But just on the side.
Yeah, I like it. And you know, we didn't even talk about creature names, but I think that's also fascinating. When especially you're using ancient names of creatures or beings, and I think that's one thing that a lot of authors mix classic, ancient, like even Greek, or what am I trying to think of? Like even just archaic beings that they use in their fantasy novels. I think that's fascinating. But anyway,
fun. I think it should be fun.
Well, then if that's all, ladies, we will come back again in 2 weeks, because next week someone is going to be in Disney World. I don't know who. I'm not jealous or anything.
No, me neither.
Do you know what? I almost said I'm not jelly or anything, because that's what people are saying for jealous, and then I thought I'm too old to be using that terminology.
Yeah. That's kind of
sad?
like, it's kind of like chillax. Like, that word shouldn't have ever been used in a movie script, like, ever.
Yeah.
Never.
I don't know. I've been watching a lot of Buffy lately on Netflix, and they say chillax a lot on that show.
I know, but that's a lot older than the movie that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
A lot older.
Yeah. Well, then we will talk to each other in 2 weeks then.
Yay.
Okay.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Bye.